Watchtower's view of women. An article I really want to discuss today with you, Sherry, particularly, but even more fun having Sasha in the room because
Okay.
it's about the Watchtower's view of women. And
Oh,
and I mean, I Watchtower, Jehovah's Witnesses are a patriarchal society, so women have to view men as their head. Knowing the two of you, I know, Sherry, that you're probably about equal to Sasha mentally
she's
and
far
emotionally.
smarter than me. Far smarter than me. And I even with the Samuel Hurd 70% smaller brain that she has, she's far smarter than me.
Yeah. So knowing that, I just really want to go through this article with you and just understand, how did you absorb this information and justify this information? Like, even looking at you today, Sasha's got the fat, flowery, feminine type of shirt on. You got the checks, like the masculine woodcutter shirt on. It's like, so in such a dynamic where you're both really, really nice people, really capable people, how did you justify that? Keep to hear women are, yeah, appreciated, but still men, there's something about men that makes them have to hold the position of headship. So let's go through this article.
Yeah.
And I haven't warned you at all before this very moment that this was what we're going to talk about. So I'm really looking forward to going through this and just seeing, as you, like, a lot of these quotes you probably haven't heard for a long time, and these images you haven't heard for a long time. I just want to see your reaction on the spot of how does it make you feel now
Okay.
realizing that you can consider yourself an equal. You can make decisions. In a good relationship, both of you will be involved, but it doesn't have to be like, all right, so now that Sasha's heard all opinions, he's the one that gets to say the final the final choice. So let's run through this.
Before we start, I have an important question.
Yes.
What is your channel's view on language? Because I strongly suspect I'm going to have trouble containing myself.
Try and keep it maybe M15.
M15, okay.
Yes. And should we also start this off with a trigger warning for any other women watching? We'll start with a trigger warning for all women watching that there's going to be a lot of misogyny in the articles and the quotes that come from.
The views discussed are not necessarily the views of the panel.
Absolutely not.
This article on jwfacts.com, it's Watchtower's view of women, talks about how witnesses are patriarchal because only men are permitted to hold positions of responsibility. Only they are allowed to do teaching, which is incredible that you can have like a 10-year-old boy giving a Bible reading because that's considered teaching, but you can't have a 80-year-old woman give a Bible reading. She can only have, the discussion with a householder where she's learning on the platform. It's ridiculous. Anyway, and Watchtower continues to portray sisters with the demeaning point of view of belonging in the kitchen. And now I pride myself on being an exceptionally good cook. Although when I cooked for you the other day, it wasn't the best meal I've ever cooked, but
it was pretty good.
I love cooking, and I've always shared cooking duties, and yet you still see a lot of pictures of the woman's in the kitchen while the elder husband's doing some research from the Bible or whatever. So it's a real Stepford Wives feel about Watchtower pictures, and I would have thought that, I mean, they obviously, the Watchtower marketing department's more conscious of not offending people. So the magazines are a little bit branching out a little bit, but still not much at all. And they still have these like 1950s ideal American household sort of pictures. This is a bit lighthearted, but this article goes into the effects of this misogynistic male-dominated religion can be really tragic. Domestic violence, child abuse and rape, and that sounds a bit much maybe, and it does need a trigger warning on this video, but it is a massive reality within the religion. And I know personally just absolutely untold numbers of cases of domestic violence, child abuse and rape. In fact, when my dad was a circuit overseer in his first circuit, so this is when I was still at Bethel, he in congregation after congregation had to put down elders for domestic violence because the circuit overseer before him refused to actually demote elders that were known to be beating their wives. And it's like, it was a big issue in the congregations. And you can see that when you're told your whole life, you're the man, you're the head, the woman is inferior in some sort of way, that it can give you justification for why you can react that way.
Well, also because I know you'll be showing some of the images, like this one from the July 15, 2009 Watchtower, where the caption is, "What situation provides a wife an opportunity to support her husband's headship?" This kind of thing, it just leads straight into victim blaming, because then it becomes, well, wife, maybe if you were a better wife, maybe if you respected your husband more, then, you know, you'd be promoting peace in the household and your husband wouldn't react the way that he does. Like
it's the epitome of "look what you made me do" behavior. And we've spent quite a few years helping people who are reaching out for support, not as experts, just as peers. And unfortunately, we've lost count of the amount of stories of women who have come from abusive situations, as you made mention of there, Paul, where their husbands or the elders in the congregation failed to take care of them, or perhaps contributed to the abuse, whether that be physical, emotional, or even sexual abuse that takes place under this misogynistic banner.
Well, I mean, that picture that you refer to, the husband's reading some Watchtower publication, maybe preparing for a meeting, and she's cooking, and it's like, you support the husband by doing the domestic work. It's like, not every woman enjoys cooking. Like, a lot of men are good cooks, and so, you know, is a witness husband gonna, you know, blame the wife? It's like, I'm not a good spiritual head because you're not, you know, you're not doing the domestic chores enough, so I don't have enough time. And yeah, like you say, that blame game goes on.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so let's get into the article. So the headship arrangement, let's just describe what that is first of all. I mean, the Watchtower strictly follows Bible advice on the role of females, and Paul's comment that the head of a woman is a man from 1 Corinthians 11 verse 3. So that forms the foundation for the headship arrangement and underlines the position of the woman in the congregation and the marriage. Now, I'm not going to go into what Paul meant. That's a whole different topic about women, whether women should be preachers and whether they should, exactly what Paul meant.
Remain silent, yes.
Whether the Old Testament treated women like possessions or not, like that's not the purpose of this article. This purpose of the article is just to highlight what the Watchtower's teaching now and how the effect of that. Watchtower 2010 describes it as an orderly arrangement of divine origin, and it's to be considered a privilege and a joy. So the Watchtower's got a great way of putting things, of talking about it. We respect women. That's an arrangement that's for the better. It's a privilege. It's a joy, all that sort of stuff. But what it says on the surface, that's sort of marketing lingo. But what the reality underneath is can be two very different things.
Yeah.
Yes, I think many people will know Jehovah's Witnesses use that terminology quite often when there is a chore or a responsibility to do. It's reworded as a privilege. So the privilege of hall cleaning as opposed to the responsibility of scrubbing floors. It was the privilege of being able to be the assistant to the men in the congregation or to be subservient to the men, as opposed to the demeaning role of being a second-class citizen in the organization.
Yeah, I can't help, because I work in sales, I train salespeople now, I can't help but see everything the Watchtower does is just a slick marketing sales organization. If you look at the positions of leadership in the organization, this Watchtower 2013, this image here, just read through the top down. So you start at the top, and I mean, this is funny because this is the earthly part. So forget it. It doesn't really mention that you got God and Jesus who are men there, but so we hit the earth, and what's the number one role?
Oh yeah, the governing body.
Now, how many women are on the governing body, Sherry?
Zip.
0. So below that, then you got the branch committees. Who make up the branch committees?
Men.
Yes.
No women.
No
Zip.
women.
With the governing body, there's only one non-white person on there. But witnesses are all over the world. There's 1 million from America, but there's 8 million from elsewhere. In America, the African Americans are a huge portion of the American witnesses, and there's just the one token African American on there, and no women, as you say. So a very disjoint group of people, not representative of the people that they're trying to serve.
No.
Just going to make mention that the governing body and the branch committee could definitely be described as being filled with stale, pale males. There is no representation other than that, sadly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so you keep going down there. So the next level is traveling overseas. They're all men because they have to be elders. Below that is the congregation's body of elders. They're all men because you've got to be men to be an elder. And then below that, you have the congregation. And then the congregation is made up of men and women and publishers, men and women. So just the bottom is basically men and women form the bottom, and you just have that like that, half men, half women. Only that bit can rise up the organisation.
Have you seen that meme? Seen the meme of the Telegraph poll?
No.
Right, and I should find it. And there's birds on it, right? So it's trickle down. Bird
Oh
poop.
yes, I've seen that. Yes.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah.
And
so true.
The interesting thing, you made reference to sales organisations. Well, the majority of those who go out in the preaching work in individual congregations are generally the women in the congregation. And yet that's all they can ever do. They do the majority of the work, and yet they never have the ability to climb up the ranks, so to speak, or to be used in positions of authority or oversight, even though they're expected to do the majority of the work on the ground.
Yeah.
I
remember with the morning group, and there's all these sisters that have been in Sydney for years. There's me who've just arrived. I got to run the group, and then sometimes if there was an elder, there was a couple of old retired elders there that were really incompetent. And there's this sister, Lynn Penfold. You could just see the massive frustration because she was very organised, and she was one of those people we talk about, never been married. And so has never been able to do anything, and yet has this huge ability, and just the frustration that she couldn't run it. And she would say, if women made elders, we would be so much better than some of these men.
Oh yeah.
And not realising just how that's not the sort of thing you're allowed to say, but it was so true as well.
Well, Sherry runs her own company and employs staff and does a far better job than any man would in that position. And yet, if we were in the congregation, she would then have to be subservient to others. It's a complete contradiction and a lack of respect shown to somebody's ability.
Oh, no, I've just done, for the company I work for, we do diversity training, and it's all about that the best companies are run, and this is one of the world's biggest companies actually, the best companies are run with a diverse group of managers. So you need diversity across male, female, and diversity across cultures to come up with the best outcomes, because you are then understanding the needs of the entire, entire population, not just these crazy ideas that just represent your stale male. What was that? What you said? White
stale pale males.
And that's basically what it does represent. Even the lack of families, lack of children with the governing body is why they just have these atrocious, really barbaric sort of rules about how families should be treated, how disfellowshipping and shunning and everything. So this thing goes on. There's this incredible thing. Have you you would have heard this talk by Samuel Hurd, who's now on the governing body. Let me just play the sound clip.
Scientists say that the cranial capacity of a woman is 10% smaller than that of a man. So now this shows that she's just not equipped for the role of headship. Her role is one of subjection to the man. Her role is that of submissiveness, and that means that she should recognize that she is a woman and be glad to be a woman. Never want to be what you are not equipped to be. But we'll hear a sister say, oh, if I were an elder, I'd show them a thing or two. Or sometimes we hear them say, oh, if I were a man, I do this and I do that. As if to be wishing to be something that he's not designed to be. Do you know what that borders on? That borders on homosexuality. And you know what the devil is doing nowadays? He's taking women who want to be men. He makes men out of it. And you know what else he's doing? He's taking men who want to be women, and he's making women out of it. And it's spreading. It's not a little thing. But homosexuality is something that is spreading.
I can see by your facial expression.
I haven't heard that last bit. I knew about the top bit. Didn't know about that last little pearl. Oh my goodness.
So when was that from, Paul?
That was 1971 from a district convention, and that man is on the governing body. That man is formulating policies for Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, just how absurd is that? Like, how disgusting is that actually?
It's
I mean,
offensive.
What is it basically saying? That if somebody is like a race that is a shorter race, you know, like pygmies or something, they're inferior because they're shorter and they have smaller brains. It's just totally, scientifically, there's no correlation between brain size. Like otherwise elephants would be, you know, a lot smarter than humans. It's just the dumbest concept ever, but
and it's
disgusting.
been disproven. Yeah, it's been thoroughly disproven. And yet, sadly, he spews that rhetoric out to an ignorant bunch of followers who accept that as being almost gospel, almost being truthful. How toxic is that?
It makes me feel sorry for sisterhood.
Yeah. And I mean, you can't say, oh, in 1970 they didn't know any better. It's like Einstein, they knew that his brain, he had an average brain size. They knew that the brain size doesn't create genius, like if they wanted to, but they, you know, they want to believe what they want to believe. They want to justify what they want to justify.
But then he's also demonizing women thinking that they could do something that a man does or do better than a man does, and demonizes the whole notion of a woman trying to break that role.
And let's not even
say you're homosexual if you want to be that. It's basically trying to make you feel guilty if you're trying to be successful.
Yeah.
And how disrespectful that is to those from the LGBTQI community to say that inferiority is linked with how they feel. I mean, for goodness sake, that is just
there's
disgusting.
a lot wrong. There's a lot
so
wrong
much wrong in that.
It's like insulting more than 50% of the entire global population, basically.
Yes, it's offensive.
And
Thank you for sharing that quote.
That's what I was saying. It's interesting to me that you sort of knew a little bit of this. How could you justify it as a witness? But you have to, because like with everything, it's all this cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
The governing body are right. You know, they represent God. I have to take this, and I have to like switch off any dissonance that it's causing yourself. And just to reiterate for anyone who is still a bit of a chauvinist out there, that women are as intelligent as men. Marilyn Vos Savant, Judith Polgar, Ruth Lawrence, Manhael Thabeth are some of the smartest people alive. Like I read a book about maths and how we, what we logically think is often wrong, and how to understand the reasoning of our mind and overcome its lack of logic. She's supposed to be the smartest mathematician alive, with an IQ of over 200. It's like being a female and being a male has no correlation to whether you're capable at any level or emotional. Like I'm far more emotional, and I'll cry in movies far more than anyone else that I know of either gender. It's like being emotional even has got nothing to do with being male or female. There's a little bit of time with estrogen, I guess, but there's just this whole concept of women being inferior in any way is just absolutely ridiculous.
It really is. And unfortunately, that's gone right through the structure and the organization, or the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses. The very fact that mindset exists to begin with means that everything that comes down through the leadership is going to be tainted with that skewed opinion, that warped understanding, and that judgmental attitude toward women.
You can't help then, as a child, as a boy growing up in a religion, to have to view women as inferior. So the first sort of thing here then is that because these women are inferior, they have smaller brains and they can't be heads. The first thing is women can't teach, or sisters can't teach. So in the congregation, sisters are not allowed to teach brothers in a spiritual matter. I mean, the crazy thing is even in the household, if the boy is baptized and he's 10, which you can be baptized at 10, the mother's not allowed to pray in front of him. Crazy. But in this Awake 2010, July 29, says, nowhere in the Bible, however, are women told to stand before the congregation to teach. Rather, the Apostle Paul instructed them to keep quiet in the meetings. why? One reason he wrote is so that things will be done in a proper and orderly way. It's like,
is the inference there that if women speak or teach, things will be disorderly? Is there an assumption there that as soon as a woman stands up to speak, it will all become disastrous?
that quote went on to say, for the congregation to run smoothly, God has assigned the role of teaching to one group. So definitely what you said, that inference that women would disrupt the congregation, that wouldn't run smoothly. And it was funny actually, because I was in a congregation in Weipa. So it was it wasn't a congregation. I was in a congregation on Thursday Island. Weipa was like a distant group that was like in the mining town, and there was only females there, so they had to do everything. And it was like they would, you know, it all progressed very fine. So they had to do the little congregation reports and everything. In Hobart, there was sisters. There was no capable accounting brothers, and so there was this old sister that used to do the accounting, but under the guidance of a brother. So, you know, they even recognize that often men, there aren't any capable men for certain roles. And so the man has to manage, like the incapable man has to manage the capable woman. And again, so how does a boy growing up in the religion not start to demean and devalue women if they're told that women are incapable of teaching men? It's just...
Yeah, and it's a cultural thing that we get raised with as young males in the organization. It's never actually said, but you do grow up thinking that you have more of a privileged position or are viewed in a slightly better way, because you grow up with the narrative coming through the Bible and the Jehovah's Witness publications that the men take the lead. And to a growing, developing mind, that's unhealthy. For a young boy to always hear that he is somehow better than his peers who happen to be female in the organization, or even his mother, as you rightly said, just because he may be baptized, that he takes priority. I've been in field service groups where I've seen boys of 12 having to organize and pray just because they're baptized, whereas the women have to sit there and keep quiet. It's very unhealthy for a young male to be raised like that.
Yeah, I remember when I was like 17, so I wasn't a ministerial servant, but I was regular pioneering. I rocked up to the morning group. There's all females there. So there's a sister with a tea towel on her head. Again, we'll discuss that later, taking the group. I come in and disrupt the group because I'm running late, like I always am. So sit down and they are, you have to take the group now. And I'm like, oh, sorry, but it's already commenced. It's like, no, because we're sisters. And then I hadn't had time to put my tie on. They're like, oh, you can't take the group without a tie. So I had to go run back to my car, get the tie, come back, put the tie on. The other sister takes her tea towel off her head, and then I progress with the meeting, which would have been, talk about running smoothly. Running smoothly would have been let that person who got there on time conduct it, and not let the disorganized young boy disrupt it all and then take it. So that whole running smoothly thing, doesn't make any sense.
No.
Now, Sheree, do you want to just talk about this next picture about, where it says when sister is assigned on the platform?
Yes. So this next image from Watchtower 2013 shows two sisters on the platform. When sisters are assigned parts, it's practicing a presentation or answering questions from a brother handling a talk. And so it's considered a learning experience for the sister. You can never, as a Jehovah's Witness woman, be seen to be teaching or preaching to the rest of the congregation. It has to be within this setting. So I have to say that picture just takes me back.
And was there ever an opportunity where you would deliver a part standing at the main podium of the stage?
Never, ever.
It's such a technicality because the two sisters are up there. They're discussing a presentation. It is actually teaching the audience. This is how a good sales presentation goes. But because we do it in this sort of manner, we can get away with it not being a teaching or a learning experience for anyone else. So again, it's just a technicality to get around a really stupid rule, but still is demeaning on the sisters because all the brothers know you're not good enough to be able to do this on your own and talk to us.
And I can actually recall instances of interviews or demonstrations that would take place on the platform, even at assemblies. And when a question was asked, often the panel of people there might look to the audience as they give their answer. I can specifically recall one circuit overseer saying to the sisters who are on the panel, address your answers directly back to me, not to the audience. So the women were not to make eye contact with the audience as they delivered their heartfelt comments. They were to make their comment directly to the brother who was overseeing it. Whereas the men standing on the panel could speak out to the audience, recounting the material.
Oh, it's horrible. These images here, so if you go to the JW broadcasting, so this is not like, I'm not talking about things that were in the 1970s, we're talking about things from 2021. Well, this image here was from 2019, March 2019. It is only brothers on JW.org that are doing any teaching assignments. This is interesting. Actually, do you want to read this bit, Sherry?
Yes, I know about this one.
You know
Yes, I actually in the 2018. Yes, it was the 2018 survey article that I did for JW Survey. I put this in the article because it was just so irritating and offensive that a song, so in the 2016 songbook, Sing Out Joyfully, one of the songs, Guard Your Heart, was changed to We Guard Our Hearts. And the primary reason for that that the Watchtower stated was that when a sister sang Guard Your Heart, it could be taken that she was telling a brother what to do. So to safeguard her from that peril, we'll change the words to We Guard Our Hearts. And so what a loving provision we've made for our women folk.
We've prevented you from the burden of counselling us.
Because it would have put you in a position where you would have been stepping outside of your role as the lesser one, the weaker vessel. So we can't have that. So we've changed the words. You should be thanking us.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
How pedantic, like who, I mean, someone obviously thought about it because they wrote an article about it.
Oh my God.
Changed the song. But who would have thought that because a person is singing the words, I guard your heart, that it could be taken as women trying to tell a man what to do? Like, what sort of nutty man would have...
I reckon I know which nutty man came up with this one.
I'm sure it was...
Samuel Hurd. It would have been Samuel Hurd.
The lack of consistency too. When you think there's multiple songs that have a clear call to action or a directive in some of the Jehovah's Witness theocratic songs, they have things about boldly go preaching, forward go. That could be determined as being a directive that is being issued out of the mouths of all who are singing it, women included. But they weren't changed.
But let's
what about
remember,
that song,
this
Forward You Witnesses? It's like,
yes,
that's
right.
like, that could be taken, a woman saying,
right,
Forward You Witnesses, you know, I'm a general leading the army. That's, why don't they change that one?
But to take it back to the earthly part of Jehovah's organization here and the hierarchy, this religion would have us believe that through Holy Spirit, they've been instructed to change the words of a song. Like it's that important. And then to put it in the Watchtower as an explanation, it's
embarrassing.
And with, when I was at Bethel, you know this, Sasha, women couldn't sit at the head of the foot. You couldn't even sit at the foot of the table. It was too much of a privilege for a woman to be able to be the foot. Like, she's got to be on the side. It's
so inappropriate.
That's a really good point you make, Paul. Yeah, the tables at Bethel are generally 8 to a table, 3 on each side, 1 at either end. But yes, there was absolutely no way, even in casual dining, so perhaps after hours, not in the formal breakfast or lunchtime setting, a sister never sat at the foot of the table without being given really bad glances. And I can actually specifically recall a tour group coming through once where of witnesses who didn't understand the etiquette of the Bethel dining room, and a sister took the seat. I was actually directed to go and ask her if she would care to move around to another location. And perhaps you saw similar things when you did when you were waiting tables there in Bethel.
I mean, I've also seen that outside of Bethel, where in certain family situations, the father has told a sister, you can't sit at the end of the table. Like, even in their home, it's ridiculous. You can really spice up Bethel by replacing them all with round tables.
But then who would be the head?
Oh, well, that's the conundrum, isn't it, really? They'll never have round tables for that reason.
Now the next part is my favorite part. It's just about having a head covering. Did you ever have a head covering, Sherry?
Yes, I did. On occasions, if I was conducting a Bible study, and if I had a brother come along with me on any occasion, and I did have it a few times as a pioneer where there were not many men in the congregation, not many during the week that could take the field service group. And I always felt so terribly uncomfortable because the other women in the group, some of these women had been district overseers' wives. And because they were no longer officially holding the position of pioneer, they did not feel it was appropriate for them to conduct the field service group. And so they would insist that I would do it because I was the pioneer. And I'd have to wear a head covering. And it was just, I felt like I was usurping a role that it was not appropriate for. It just felt so uncomfortable to.
Because it's not a cultural thing, the head coverings are often a serviette or like a tea towel.
I had a scarf.
Which is so
demeaning.
That was good, but it's just so disrespectful to go, oh, I'm going to put a tea towel on my head because I'm going to train a brother.
Yes.
It's like
Yes.
in some cultures where they wear head coverings as a normal thing, at least it's a professional, respectful looking garment. But here where you go and get yourself a little paper serviette, then how is that in any way respectful to anyone?
It actually makes more of a mockery of the proceedings and makes people feel very uncomfortable in those who are in attendance. The awkwardness of it. I don't think any of us ever felt comfortable when that happened. And I believe that deep down it went against what we all knew what was appropriate as humans, but we did it because that was the direction that came down from the leadership of the organization.
Mm. And look at this picture there. What do you see, that one, Keep Yourself in God's Love from 2015? What can you do? What strikes you out of that picture, Sherry?
Well, first off, the dude in the back who's pouring himself a cup of tea, which is just terrible that he's had to pour his own cup of tea, let me just say.
True.
The woman should have been doing that. Well, he's obviously not one of Jehovah's Witnesses because he's bearded.
Yeah, so he's a worldly person. He's bearded, so he gets to pour his own tea.
Yep. Which then, like, I'm kind of interpreting with this picture that it's even taken to the point of he's obviously not a baptized Jehovah's Witness, but even because he's there present and he's the head of the house, she still has to, out of a sign of respect that he's the head of the house, wear a head covering. Exactly.
So she's got to have her head covering on so it doesn't look like she's teaching the person who is the head of the household, which means then that when you've got a witness family where which is often the case, the unbelieving husband, and they have a meal, the wife has to put a head covering on to pray for her children in front of the husband. It's like, what sort of message does that give to these children that mum is inferior to this dad, even though this dad's going to die at Armageddon because I've been told he's a corpse that, you know, doesn't worship Jehovah and has no right to be alive, and God is going to brutally destroy him soon. But still, his mum is inferior because he's a man, not because he's a spiritual man, just because he's a man, full stop.
You're right. And how disgusting. What a toxic environment. Kingdom Ministry 2015. So again, to put in context, these are references that are current in the JW or the Jehovah's Witness teachings and procedures. These are not archaic things. We made reference to Samuel Hurd's quote from 1971, which we could say, well, we've come a long way since then. Clearly not.
No. have not come along. In fact, I would say we're still very, very much in the grips of 1950s and archaic Iron Age man ideas from the Bible, where women are just chattel. They are to be owned, and they don't have any identity or definition outside of those parameters.
Yeah.
And it's so dangerous. And I know we're going to get to it it's just such a toxic environment to have. It's so terribly unhealthy and damaging because of the abuse that it allows to then happen within that context.
How does that coincide with the respect?
Well, that's a nice segue into our next section about wifely subjection, because in this 2011, again, like fairly recent article, it talks about how a submissive wife is praised and her subjection is not undignified. It's exactly what you just said. It's not undignified that she's in subjection. But then read the article. It's like, do you want to read that? I like this coming from you, Sherry. It's just, how is this not undignified the way it describes women?
Okay. Oh, God. This is going to be fun. Okay, so there's two quotes here. They're just pearlers. Watchtower 2011. Let wives be in subjection to their husbands as to the Lord, wrote the Apostle Paul. And yes, the only way I'm going to be able to get through this is if I tone up the sarcasm. This statement in no way suggests an undignified position. There's also the matter of being economical. A foolish woman, oh my God, a foolish woman likely squanders her family's hard-earned resources. A supportive wife is not like that, you see, because she's not out earning the money, he's out earning the money, and then if she's just spending all of his money, and that's just foolish woman. Okay. She cooperates with her husband in financial matters. This is the supportive wife. Right. Her way of doing things is marked by prudence and economy. We really are in the 1950s. No, this was a 2011 quote.
Can I just ask, shouldn't you have a head covering on now whilst you read this material to us?
I'm trying to remember this is an MA 15 rating, or I'm going to swear and use bad words. I do so happen to have at my desk
a head covering.
I could just do that and we'd be fine. But you know what?
Does that count? I'm not sure if that counts.
No, I don't think it counts anyway, but I don't care. Where was I? Oh, yes, a supportive wife.
Prudence, good old 50s name.
Prudence and economy, yeah. She does not pressure her husband to work overtime. Being exemplary in a supportive role may be a challenge for a wife when her husband makes a decision she disagrees with. Even then, she manifests a quiet and mild spirit and cooperates with him to make his decision work.
Yeah.
How do you feel reading that?
Sick. But let's continue and read the Watchtower 2008 November article, because we have an experience here from a supportive wife who is saying how she feels. Before studying the Bible, I didn't think that my husband ought to be the head of the family. I liked to make decisions on my own. However, I gradually found that applying Bible principles contributed to the peace and happiness of our family. Slowly, it became easier for me to be submissive, and my husband has noticed these changes in me.
So this is 2011 and 2008,
yeah.
About basically that assumption that women shouldn't be working or won't be working, so they'll be prude and not spend it on Prada bags and things. They won't get their husband to work overtime, so they can squander it on female things. It's like, yeah, as Sasha said, how do you feel about that?
I'm completely and utterly disgusted. It revolts me now to read that kind of rhetoric.
But you were a witness back
yeah, I know. Yes, I was.
So we sat at a Kingdom Hall whilst this study took place, and you would have read this paragraph. You don't specifically remember it at the time? It was just...
I don't remember it specifically at the time. I do know that around that time, though, because I was working full-time now and I was managing a practice, things were starting to sit uneasily with me, with how I saw things happening in the congregation, but I didn't relate it to myself and how women were treated. It's taken me quite a while to realize that as a female Jehovah's Witness, you are actually participating in your own oppression and you don't even know it. You don't even know that you are supporting the mechanisms to keep you down, to keep you quiet, to keep you silent. And that is just it's so harmful, because then when you have something happen where you are either abused emotionally, mentally, physically, sexually, you don't think enough of yourself that you're worth it to go and get some help. You think that you failed. It's something you did that made it happen. It's just, so reading this now, it's not just words on a page, it's the culture that's behind this, and it's what this kind of doctrine makes possible that I find completely revolting.
Participating in your own oppression.
Yeah, participating in my own oppression. And that little phrase is something I've just heard recently in the last few months from an ex-Mormon woman. And she said it. She said that she didn't realize she was participating in her own oppression. And when she got those words out, I just froze and thought, that's exactly what I was doing. I was doing the same. So when I went from door to door and someone would say to me, you're being really held down as a woman. It's quite a misogynistic religion. I'd defend it and go, oh, no. This is God's arrangement of things, right? We were made as a compliment to the man. And all of that rhetoric would come out of my mouth. I was completely supporting the whole design, the whole mechanism to keep me quiet, silent, and controlled.
This is where when witnesses leave, and then the Watchtower will talk about these apostates. Why are they so vicious and bitter and angry and all this sort of stuff? And it's like that. It's like, because you were participating and promoting your own, your own oppression, and you don't understand why. Like, how is it that I've been manipulated? So for me, I wasn't the one being oppressed as the male, with the father who was the secretary overseer and everything. I was at the center of the organization, but still, I was still oppressed by the way I was treated, the things I went through, the ridiculous ideas about not, living forever. And even like when I did a uni degree, so when I went to Bethel, they stuck me into cleaning to basically humble me. So I didn't think I was better than I was, just because I did some silly commerce degree. It's like, it was just all this sort of oppression that you have. And then you come back and you go, how was I made to think and act and do these things, that when you just see that manipulation and control, you can't help but just explode and just want to help other people see that as well.
Absolutely.
I agree. And, reading this here, far be it from me to speak on behalf of a woman, but on behalf of a man, when I read that, I'm offended by that material. I'm hurt by that material. And it's not even directed at me, as you said, as men who had the opportunity to be at the center of the organization.
Yeah.
But this is deeply, deeply offensive. And I dare say there were lots of very, very good men in the organization or Jehovah's Witnesses still who would also find that deeply offensive now, because we are living in a world that understands that there should not be any difference of people.
Well, a lot of men in the religion are good men, and they don't treat their wives as second rate. And so when they hear this, they just have to, pretend it wasn't said. Like, they do allow their women.
It creates cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, they do allow their women. They're women.
I'm saying it sounds like a Watchtower. They do, allow their wives to have equal say and make decisions and go to work, earn more money than them. Like, a lot of them are decent human beings. So this sort of stuff, that just has to be like, just, sort of let it slip through to the goalkeeper, I guess.
Yeah.
This next comment, even a stepfather is the head of his wife and the stepchildren. How disturbing. This has been a concern for me. I specifically didn't leave as early as I wanted to. One of the reasons was, what if my son's 5 and there's a stepfather who beats my child? Then here it says that the stepfather is the head of the family, but the stepfather may wish to delegate the matter of discipline for a while, especially if it involves punishment. So it's basically saying the stepfather has the right to beat a stepchild, which to me is abhorrent. Like, I'm totally against beating any child, but if it's a stepfather beating a child, that's just even worse. Like, that is pure, simple assault. That's like, it should be, it probably is a jailable offence, actually. And the Watchtower's going, well, don't beat them straight away. Let the parent, the actual parent, if she's a woman, have a bit of say in how her child is going to be disciplined. It's horrific.
It's offensive. It's absolutely offensive.
Yeah. And then you look at these illustrations, and again, you still see there's all the brothers, they're talking about their watchtowers, and there's the women making a bit of food. Picture after picture in the watchtower. It's still women are the food makers. Yeah.
Yep. The home keepers, the capable wife who can find. It's menial tasks.
Yeah.
The same as, Kingdom Hall cleaning and scrubbing toilets. And yes, you can do all of that, but can't do anything else. Can't even work behind the magazine counter when that was the thing.
Carry the microphone.
Yeah.
Female still is not allowed to do the books at the Kingdom Hall unless there's exceptional circumstances.
He was a account servant for how long?
Oh, a decade.
And I would hear it. I love him dearly, but maths is not his strong suit.
No.
It's just not. And so every month I would hear him, why is that not working? Why is it not balancing? And I couldn't go in and help him. And maths is my strong suit. Like, I'm good at reconciling figures. I figure figures can't talk back. So you can usually work out what's going on. But
it was inappropriate for me to ask Sherry to assist. So how silly is that my very capable wife could not look at the congregation accounts to assist me because she lacked certain qualifications, because she wasn't male? How ridiculous is that?
I was made the congregation auditor, and there was a guy, Andrew, I won't say his last name, who was another, like, just clueless at maths. And the congregation books were just every single time, nothing balanced. Like, and he didn't even bother to try and get it to balance. He was that hopeless at it. But again, you could have reached out to so many sisters, but no, because and how he's like doing the accounts in any way a teaching assignment or anything.
No.
Yeah. But we're going to move on now to the next part, the consequences. And this is like the really, really terrible part about all of this.
Yeah.
So I've heard sisters claim that they're happy that they don't have the workload of their husbands. It's in their own interest, it's in their benefit that they don't have to take these congregational positions of authority. But while it might seem a little consequence that they take the back seat, the results of being a misogynistic, male-dominated religion is, as we mentioned before, there's domestic violence, child abuse, and rape. And this part about domestic violence, this will upset you, but you're very well aware of it, Sasha and Sherry. I don't want to suggest here that the witnesses are really bad at domestic violence. The Watchtower is encouraging the domestic violence. It does the exact opposite. It does say that you should not abuse your wife. So domestic violence isn't promoted, so not suggesting that at all.
I agree they do nothing about promoting domestic violence, but they don't do anything to protect women either.
No, it's worse than that, even though and I've got this list of articles here where they actually talk about enduring domestic violence. So this is the problem. It's that they say that women, and this is not just a one-off slip of the pen.
No, it's not.
Like, over and over, decade after decade, they praise women for enduring domestic violence. And now this is, again, it's one of these things. They talk about the domestic violence being from worldly husbands. The domestic violence in most of the cases is from witness husbands, because most of them are married to witnesses. But the article doesn't want to admit that is a issue. So it's always talking about the violence coming from the unbelieving mate. But it is regularly talking about that if a woman is experiencing domestic violence, she should stick through it, so she can win them over without a word. So she can bring praise to Jehovah. Like, how does it bring praise to Jehovah going, I'll turn the other cheek when you're like, the person's giving you black eyes? Like, that doesn't glorify Jehovah at all. That just shows that you're manipulated, controlled by just a despicable religion. Like, that you would sit there and take that and feel that that's what your obligation is.
Yeah, deeply, deeply offensive. The whole notion that the only way for a woman to ever leave a relationship is if there's cases of immorality. But what about if a woman is clearly at risk in a domestic violence situation? The very fact that the organization says you should try and just put up with that situation, try and win them over, as you rightly pointed out, show kindness and love and empathy toward the abusive spouse, and hopefully they may change their ways. that is not only negligent, that is something that the organisation needs to be held accountable for.
Yeah.
The wife, you're allowed to leave your partner if you are spiritually in danger.
Endangered.
This is the
Yes.
crazy thing. It's like such a mismatch there. It's going, if the husband is going to affect you spiritually because he's apostate, he's like, won't let you go to meetings, you can leave him. But if he's beating you, then if you remain long enough, if you take enough hits, he may become a witness. It's like, it is all they care about is numbers. They don't care about the human at all. It's like, we don't want you to leave because we want to have one more publisher. If a person starts beating you, that needs to be stopped straight away. You need to get out of there if that doesn't stop. The Watchtower does talk about domestic violence being wrong. So there's a whole awake devoted to violence against women. It's being wrong. It's bad. You shouldn't do it. And then the very last page still has to bring in, what does headship in marriage really mean? So even on an article about violence against women, couldn't help but talk about the headship arrangement. And the headship arrangement is behind so much of the violence.
Yes.
It is the justification for the violence. Beating that wife back into line, beating her into submission, making sure that she's doing what God wants her to do. It's like the very reason that underpins a lot of domestic violence is in an article about violence against women. Like the irony of trying to find the two. Couldn't they have once just, and it's an awake, not even a Watchtower, couldn't they have just this on that one issue about violence against women, not discuss the headship arrangement?
Yes. And there's very little reference in any of those situations to gaining the help from external secular professionals who can assist if there's a case of domestic violence or counselling or therapy or anything like that. There is no reference to that.
Yeah, nothing at all. Because they wouldn't want to recommend you go to a worldly group, even though they have huge, really good arrangements for helping people, removing them from danger, etc. Just go talk to the elders, and the elders almost without doubt will say, go back to your husband and try and be a bit more mild so that you don't incite him to being violent, which is it just doesn't make any sense. And the funny thing in that article too is that it refers to Abraham and Sarah as a fine example of headship. Abraham for many years was committing adultery with the maidservant, took her as a concubine, had a child to her, and Sarah was pleading her husband, can you please get rid of them? It was offensive to her, and he didn't listen. He did not care. And then finally, when Sarah had a child, then Abraham's like, oh yeah, all right, we'll get rid of her. I don't need her anymore. I don't need that son anymore because I've got another son. And also, how is that a good example of headship?
It's not.
Respect for Sarah. There's no respect there for Sarah by doing that.
Absolutely. How unhealthy too. You've got Abraham, who was basically a person who engaged in domestic violence by taking his son up to a mountain and threatening to offer him up as a burnt sacrifice to his God. That's a domestic violence situation there.
Very traumatizing. Okay. In 2012, a truly shocking article was released that praised women for staying with husbands despite violent abuse. February 15 edition, page 29 says, Selma recalls a lesson she learned from the witness who studied with her. On one particular day, says Selma, I didn't want to have a Bible study. The night before, Steve had hit me as I tried to prove a point, and I was feeling sad and sorry for myself. The article goes on to say, the sister softly said, Selma, who is trying to be a Christian here, you or Steve? Realizing that I needed to adjust my thinking, I prayed to Jehovah to help me to be more loving towards Steve. Slowly, things started to change. After 17 years, Steve accepted the truth. The 2012 article about Selma received a lot of online comments, was written about on different forums, etc. And those forums then invoked a lot of response from former Jehovah's Witnesses who had experienced domestic violence.
One woman recounted that she had horrible memories of sitting with two elders and my abusive, now ex-husband, I was told to not keep count of the injury. So did that mean my husband could keep on hitting me, hurting me, throwing me across the room, sometimes in front of my 2 little boys? Don't keep count of the injury.
It's appalling.
So domestic violence is okay. That's the message they actually are delivering, despite the fact that they say that it's not, we don't approve of that. Well, you are facilitating it. You're enabling it to continue.
Yeah,
it's baffling. It's absolutely baffling. It goes against all humanity.
And the really horrible thing here is we're reading, okay, of accounts that either Watchtower has put in its articles or forums where ex-witnesses have put up their stories. But Sasha and I, in the last few years, in supporting people that are coming out, we're hearing these stories as well. And so this is not happening. This is happening, and it's happening on a major scale. I know the stories we could tell you of what people have gone through, of what women have suffered, and it's the same thing as what we're reading here, where elders are giving such, oh my God, terrible advice.
I'll draw your attention to this paragraph that you've quoted from the 2018 Watchtower, where it encouraged Jehovah's Witness wives to endure domestic violence situations as a way to praise Jehovah or win their spouse over, and that separation is only sanctioned for extreme physically abusive situations. And yet we have cases where wives who have been physically abused by their husbands in ways that we won't recount now have actually been told by the elders that you need to go back home because you're making it very difficult for your husband while you're away. So they've actually specifically gone on record as elders telling a wife to go back to an abusive situation so that the husband can be taken care of better.
Who was also an elder.
And this Watchtower from 2018, so this is after the 2012 Watchtower. So the 2012 Watchtower came out. There's a huge, upset about it. There was articles written about how dangerous these domestic violence situations are. The Watchtower, you think, might have let's just tone it down a little bit, but they didn't. They still 6 years later released another article, and this is just what it says here. It says he might be extremely physically abusive, even to the point that she feels that her health or life is in danger. He might refuse to support her and the family or severely endanger her spirituality. Some Christians have personally decided that a separation is necessary, but other Christians in comparably difficult situations have not. They have endured and tried to work on improving matters. Many loyal Christians have remained with an unbelieving mate under very trying circumstances. So here is talking about, yes, you can leave in an extremely physically abusive situation where you feel your life is in danger, but there's been witnesses that don't, and we look up to them because these loyal Christians have stuck with their husbands despite their lives being in danger or feeling their lives are in danger. I mean, how terrifying to think your life's in danger and go, but if I'm a real loyal Christian wife, I will stay with this person. It's just...
It's creating martyrdom.
Well, I was just about to comment on that part of this is also dovetailing into another element of the religion, and that's its persecution complex. So if you have an abusive husband, well, that's your thorn in the flesh that you have to endure. So there's that element on top of the fact that you've got this foundation of the headship arrangement that is just so flawed and toxic.
It's deeply dangerous.
So that article goes on as well to say that to raise the issues of separation. So if you separate from this person who may be, beating you, possibly to the point where you feel your life is in danger, can you think of the challenges that it will lead?
Yes.
What about maybe you'll commit adultery? What about if you're lonely? What about the children? How will you raise them in the truth? This thing, what of her material and sexual needs? What about loneliness? Are there children to consider? Would a divorce make it harder to raise them in the truth? It's how hard would it be to raise someone in the truth when they're watching their parents bashing each other, like, or more likely the husband bashing the wife.
Yes.
It's like, how, is that person still going to think it's the truth if they see that the elders are supporting their mother being physically abused? It's like, and yet the whole thing is like, no, they should stay together because a separated family is not as likely to stick to the numbers. It's not going to make our numbers look good.
Mm.
So my eyes just fell onto the scripture from paragraph 16. If a woman has an unbelieving husband and he is agreeable to staying with her, let her not leave her husband. It's all whether it's agreeable to him.
Yeah.
What if it's not agreeable to her? Jeez.
Speechless.
I mean, I even if you want to say, look, the headship arrangement is Paul talked about it, so we have to have it. It doesn't have to be to this extreme.
No.
Version. Like, it doesn't mean that women can't still have a say in matters, and that it's like what's agreeable to her, what's agreeable to both of them. It's like they've taken this massive extremist viewpoint of it, which is totally unjustifiable. Even if you want to go, yeah, the Bible does talk about, well, the New Testament talks a little bit about, the teaching capacity or whatever. All the rest of this stuff is just not, there's no support for this scripturally at all. There's no justification except some really demented old men that are running the organization.
Right.
That just do not have any respect for women, basically.
Not at all. None.
It's disgusting. Well, there's a good quote that you've got there about misogynistic teachings about women and headship fosters domestic violence. And there's a reference to an article from 22nd of October 2018. Submit to your husbands. Women are told to endure domestic violence in the name of God. And it presents research into fundamentalist Christian groups. And Jehovah's Witnesses are really no different to a lot of those fundamentalist Christian groups who adopt that same misogynistic view of women. But tragically, there's countless numbers of people that are now affected because of that view.
Yeah, so this is great because it's research not into Jehovah's Witnesses, but it's research into, fundamentalist Christian groups that talk about the headship arrangement and sticking through, domestic violence. Evangelical men are more likely than men of any other religious group to assault their wives. And like I said, I know from experience that it's a big problem within Jehovah's Witnesses as well. Yeah. But reading what the Watchtower said, is there any doubt or any reason why it wouldn't be? When it's, you're getting a get out of jail card from the elders if you're a man. And although the Watchtower articles try and talk about it being the unbelieving male, it's like the same thing. It's when, and as you know from all these experiences, all these women who had Jehovah's Witness husbands that were beating them, the elders kept on saying, go back, look after him, otherwise, they might end up having to leave the truth. They might end up, succumbing to their sexual desires with some other woman or something,
And
which again, the whole thing you can't divorce is another.
Right. So again, the blame is put onto the woman, A, for getting him upset enough that he would lash out in the domestically violent way, and B, for leaving him and making it hard or difficult for him, and C, then it would be your fault if he ended up doing something to leave the truth. And so we're seeing a culture here of victim blaming, and we've come so far as a society worldwide that shouldn't be the case, and yet here's an organization that still focuses upon victim blaming.
It's so sad because there's so much information out there. There has been so much research done into domestic violence and what can be done from like provisions that the government makes or that social services make, or just the understanding of the support that people need through that. I mean, it's not rocket science to give the right information. The right information is out there.
The Watchtower just shows that it is always behind what current, knowledge is about. It's like as much as they pride themselves on we're the forefront, we're the cutting edge, we're God's people, God's given us the perfect rule book in the Bible. It's like witnesses are always behind on these important matters. And that leads very nicely into the next topic, child abuse. It's just incredible how they have shown that despite having, the perfect law, that their rules being changed and brought up to date only at the pressure from worldly influences. They are renowned globally now for being behind what is acceptable practice. And if they were being led by Jehovah, they should have had the perfect practices from the 1919 when God picked them. Like, he should have gone, this is how you deal with this type of situation, and given them the go-to manual that everyone else wants to copy. You find in 2019, they're 100 years later, they're still not as up to date with how to treat this situation of child abuse, and not as up to date as just what the standard governments are issuing and the guidelines they give around the world.
Absolutely. And on that point, you've got great references here to the Australian Royal Commission. And if anybody hasn't looked into it, please do. But Sherry had a fantastic statement that she said about the Royal Commission. So here we have an organization that claims to be directed by God's Holy Spirit, and yet...
So I was discussing this with my father way back when, and he thought I'd stopped attending meetings because I was discouraged. And he was, we're getting better about the child abuse stuff. We understand more about it now. And I just went, I do not understand why it takes Satan's organization to tell God's organization how to protect children.
Yes, exactly.
That's it. I don't get that.
Yeah. For a lot of people, that should be the aha moment. It should be that if Satan's organization is better at protecting children than God's organization, it's not God's organization. That's the end of the story. That should be enough for people to go, I'm not walking into a kingdom hall again. There should be no justification about, why the light gets brighter or blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, your standards have been proven through around the world in many different forums now, has been proven to be inadequate, and the updates that you've made over the last 20 years have been by taking information provided by Satan's world. Then you are not directed by God.
Exactly.
What else is there to discuss? There's nothing.
Exactly.
That's it. The interesting thing is that it was Barbara Anderson that started to highlight the problems with the child abuse policies that Watchtower had in the 90s. So one of the few women that's taken into the writing department because of her ability to do research. And it's a woman that had to come out and say, we should not be letting elders abuse children and stay elders. We should not be allowing people to get away with this. It's like, where were the governing body that are just sitting back so removed from what just everyday life is like, that it took getting a female who shouldn't be talking up to them anyway to go, seriously, we need to have a little bit of compassion and need to look at this. And it wasn't until it got out onto, like, they didn't do almost anything about it. Next thing, it's on the news and on, and they're getting bad publicity that they're like, oh goodness, we better do something. Because there's it wasn't like, oh, we're worried about the children. It's like, oh, we're worried about our reputation. Exactly. And that was what it took to slowly make them drag their feet. When I went, because I sat there at the Royal Commission, I sat there in the audience and I was watching what was going on. And with the Royal Commission, the second time that they had the hearing, so they gave them a few months or whatever, and then came back again. And I'm sitting next to these three guys that look like Jehovah's Witnesses. They're in suits, and so this guy next to me pulls up JW Facts on his phone, and I'm like, oh, is he a witness? Like, I wonder. So then in the intermission, I went downstairs and I had lunch, and they were having lunch next to me, and I'm going, oh, who are you? So this is what is it they call back 5 to resubmit or whatever a year later. So I talked to them. I saw you looking at my website. Are you Jehovah's Witnesses or are you like former witnesses? And they go, oh no, we're Anglicans, so we're coming up after the witnesses. And the way the witnesses presented themselves was just so embarrassing. They looked like a bunch of blubbering fools. Like, they were just horrific. And I just go, wow, you must feel really good about coming after them, because there was nothing you could say that could make you look any worse than they did. And he goes, yeah, we're just absolutely in shock. We cannot believe that was the response. They've come back and that's their response. And another person I knew called Vin Toole, and Vin just like opened up a bit and goes that he was talking about how this is just being victimized by apostates. And it's like, how could they not understand here's a bunch of like policies that the government's put out that this is how you protect children. And there's like almost 100 different organizations involved, and the witnesses go, oh, they're picking on us. This is persecution. It's like, you should be ashamed of yourself. Like, it wasn't.
It was shown really clearly throughout the commission where they think it's apostate is because the two who testified have left the organization. And they've left because of how terribly they were both treated. So the disdain and just utter contempt that Watchtower had for those two women that bravely came forward to share their stories, they didn't even read their testimonies because it's apostate. It's people that have left. We're not going to read that.
I think the culture too was really borne out by, as you know, we all had the opportunity to meet Angus Stewart in person, who did an amazing job. But when we asked him how they went into the Royal Commission, he was very clear in saying we weren't going in to attack them. We were going in to collectively put our arm around to try and help work together on the issue of taking care of the vulnerable ones in our society, our children. We were not going in to attack, but the moment that witnesses came in, they went in with an antagonistic mindset. And yet, as Angus Stewart said, we were not there to attack them. We were simply there to work with them and say, how can we work together to improve and tighten these processes?
Yeah, I was talking to one of the assistants there, and she said that Justice McClellan took umbrage to the Catholic Church, like that they were by far and away the worst until Jehovah's Witnesses came in, and it was like just blown away that there's only two, Jehovah's Witnesses and the Catholic Church just stood out from all the other groups, the 80 or so other groups there, because both of them were, we are directed by God, you have no right to tell us what to do. Instead of going, this information you've given us is really helpful, thank you. It was like, how dare you speak to God's organization? The Catholics and the witnesses both, think that they're God's organization, and who just happens to be the ones always coming up with having like the most significant issues in the present day, and it is those two religions. This thing about how an innocent victim is, and so it could be a child, it could be a female, has to sit alone before three male elders, which is ridiculous. It's like, why can't you have a support? Why can't you have a lawyer next to you? Why can't you have a partner next to you? And I remember, like, there was a girl that was abused by her uncle, a friend of mine. And so this is when I was 20. So we're both 20-year-olds. She's saying when she was 15, she had to sit there in front of three old men and she was 15 on her own, sat there in front of these three old men where they asked her to go into graphic detail about the sexual things that had been done to her. And she goes, all I could think about is they're just jerking off under the table, these old men that aren't satisfied with their wives. Why are they talking to me about, or why do they want to know about my body and what parts of my body were touched and everything? It's like, I got abused, that's all that matters. You don't need to know that. You don't need me to relive in graphic detail what sexual positions this man had me in. It's like, how dare they? And and there's no just scriptural justification to say the victim has to sit in this closed room with being interrogated by three old men. The Bible says it was supposed to be done in the village where you could have a fair hearing. It's like a fair trial, like in a court case where you had people sitting in and listening to the court case. You didn't have these people like being intimidated by the three leaders of the congregation without any support at all to help them.
And this was one of the areas that the Royal Commission picked up on, because at the end of it, they gave 3 recommendations to Watchtower. And one of them was this scenario that you've just described. Their recommendation was that a woman should be part of the process, that a woman should be there to provide support to the individual. So, I mean, it was incredibly, what's the word? Oh, I can't think of the word. The commission wasn't trying to change the religion's core beliefs.
Yeah.
It wasn't even saying you can't have an internal judicial process. What it was saying is, when it's in relation to child abuse, you need to not re-traumatize the individual. So make sure you have support there. That still remains an undone recommendation.
And the thing is, the Bible talks about women having positions of responsibility.
Right.
Deborah, she was a judge. She was a prophet. If Deborah could be a judge, why can't a woman be on the judicial committee. But even if she's not on the judicial committee, at least she can be on the side of support for the traumatized victim. Like, you know, being theoretically, she should, as if Deborah was a judge, you should be able to have a judicial committee made up of male and female members. But even if that's too much of a stretch to possibly think that the witnesses could ever get to that level of enlightenment, just to have some support for people that are sitting there is
you know, and the big thing too, the fact that we're talking about this in the context of how the Jehovah's Witnesses view women. Here we've got a situation where we're talking about abuse or child abuse, and yet you've got three men formulating the response to this whole thing. There is also a culture right through of victim blaming. Like you pointed out in the article, there are questions that the elders have to answer. How much did the victim contribute to what happened? It's basically, what was she wearing? And did you ask for this? And that is the most disgusting and offensive way to go into any interaction of somebody who has perhaps been abused. To ask them how much they contributed to that abuse is something that is just inexcusable.
The elders and the governing body behind this just had no idea, and that's where they should have been going. Thank you to the judicial to the Royal Commission. Thank you for like guiding us, because we haven't done the research. We haven't got, you know, people that are psychologists and experts in the matter. So the fact that you're willing to help us so that we don't ask stupid questions like this, they should have taken that as, you know, and been really happy about it, because it wasn't the Royal Commission wasn't to look at ways of jailing, you know, the Watchtower or stopping the religion or anything. It was the way of helping just any organisation in Australia to be better, and any organisation. It wasn't a victimisation at all, but witnesses, because of the persecution complex, took it completely the wrong way, and so haven't learned from it, which is, again, that's another topic about that whole side of things. But just how because of women being looked down upon and not being allowed to be, you know, formulating policies and stuff, you have these atrocious ways of dealing with victims of child abuse. And then the next one here, rape. This thing about rape, it's just horrific. The Watchtower thinks that women bear responsibility for being raped.
It's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing that we've got articles from 1964, 74, 1980, 86 that continuously have a theme that speaks about how much did the woman contribute to this situation, or perhaps fail in some way, shape or form to stop the situation from happening. Again, we're talking victim blaming, and that is in the culture that comes through the organisation.
This thing about how you have to scream, so there's a scripture that talked about screaming. Screaming can possibly occasionally be beneficial, but to say that if you didn't scream, then you are complicit in the sexual act, you committed fornication, but you didn't scream, it is mind-blowingly dumb. Like the problem with being raped is fight or flight or freeze. So they're the three natural responses. So a lot of people freeze where they literally can't move and literally can't utter a word. And so for all these poor Jehovah's Witness women that were raped, that went into the freeze mode and couldn't scream, and then were guilty that they felt they'd committed fornication, because again, some clueless old elder, male elder, has written an article that you didn't scream, so you deserve to be raped and you deserve to be considered a fornicator. It's despicable.
Well, Paul, I know we've talked about articles that have this thought, but we don't even need to go that far back. You only need to look at the Elders Handbook from 2021. And you get in chapter 12 on determining whether a judicial committee should be formed. Paragraph 5 is about rape. And it says, one who was raped would not be guilty of porneia. Discernment is needed in considering claims of rape, taking into consideration such factors as the mental disposition of the person, the circumstances that led up to the incident, and any delay in reporting. That's now.
But anyone just watching all the Harvey Weinstein stuff and everything over the last few years knows that people are terrified to report these things.
I think it's an average of 20 years for somebody to come through and feel comfortable to fully report a case.
But the other issue is, okay, they totally misunderstand humans. They totally understand humans at all. But the reason you have to ask the question, why are they asking these questions? Why do they need to use discernment about mental disposition, circumstances that led up and delay in reporting? Because that is to then be taken into consideration as to whether it was rape or not. Is this person actually guilty of consensual immorality and it's not rape?
If I could draw attention to that excellent quote, or sorry, disgusting quote that is in one of the magazines as well, that also goes to the culture of how warped the thinking is of those who take the lead in the organization. The Watchtower even advises that in the face of rape, we should take some time to consider that the attacker may have endured difficult circumstances and we should show respect to him. So the magazine said, we need to treat the attacker respectfully. The intended victim should remember that the rapist is a human. No doubt there are circumstances in his life that have precipitated his behavior. So although a woman should never cower in fear or permit a rapist to intimidate her, at the same time, she should treat him understandingly as a fellow human. If that does not say everything about the failure to understand this situation.
I actually remember this. I remember because I was 9 and a half. And I remember one of the meetings, this subject of rape came up. And I don't remember the whole conversational context, but what I do remember is that it was spoken of that the woman would be expected to forgive the rapist. And it made such a big impression on me as a child. I couldn't imagine being in a position where you were forced to forgive. Like it just was so repellent to me. But even then, I thought that was a problem with me. I thought that was a problem with me, that I had an issue to work on if I could not forgive my attacker. If I was unfortunate to have that happen, that was actually my problem.
Well, there's been some awakes that try and say that the victim, or indicates somewhat that the victim doesn't bear any responsibility. There's still other ones like this 2003 article where it still leaves the victim feeling that if they didn't struggle enough, they may be judged by Jehovah to be at blame, and it's just horrible. It's like, and like this whole thing that people freeze and can't struggle at all, and how you should then be left feeling like you did something wrong. This argument about us screaming and justifying that you have to scream. So the Bible tells us that. It's not the governing body, it's the Bible. But they're inconsistent with how they use this. So Deuteronomy 22 talks about that if somebody is engaged to a man, another person lays down with her, you should bring them out and stone them both to death. Like the governing body doesn't say we can stone people to death anymore. So, it conveniently misses that part of it out.
Section was also referred to by Angus Stewart during the Royal Commission when he said there is a scriptural precedent that sometimes people can't scream, as you made reference to.
Well, it was on the basis of one witness.
And so here you've got this scripture from Deuteronomy is the one that he made reference to, saying there's a biblical precedent, and yet still the policies of Jehovah's Witnesses are failing.
There's just so many wrong with that, though. When you say about the engaged girl in the field, and then she ended up having to marry the rapist.
Yes.
And I love this. There's this graphic I'll put up, causes of rape.
Yeah.
Short skirts, alcohol, being out in the wrong place at the wrong time, whatever. No, causes of rape are rapists. 100% of the blame is on the rapists. It's like, it's a sad part of society that women need to think about what they're wearing, or are they accompanied by someone to be safe? Like, so, but regardless of all that, it's never their fault. It is 100% of the fault lies on the rapist, and Watchtower is just too out of touch and ignorant, or the governing body, to be able to comprehend that. And now,
Absolutely.
there's this picture of what women can and can't wear to inside.
Oh, yes.
And the whole point again is that women are not supposed to be immodest. And what's really bizarre to me about this is that women, you go to the meeting and wear a pantsuit. And I've got a picture, I can't remember her name, I'll put it up, of this lady getting arrested in the 30s, I think it was, because she wore trousers and it was unbecoming. And so this again, I can't help but think the witnesses are just trapped in this time warp. And like it's like the Amish to me. The Amish, 400 years ago, they came out to America and they still live in the way that when they came to America, they don't live like in the way of Jesus. They don't wear the clothes Jesus wore. They wear the clothes still today.
Puritanical.
Puritans, that when they were escaping Europe into America, they were stuck in that time warp. Witnesses are stuck in the time warp of being, 19th century religion, started in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and they haven't progressed. And so still it's like you can't wear a pantsuit, even though pants are less erotic or whatever the witnesses are worried about than a skirt that goes to the knees.
Absolutely.
Really
Right. We've got
crazy.
world leaders, heads of governments, corporate CEOs that wear a pantsuit. It's completely and utterly appropriate. And again, this whole victim blaming that what you wear contributes to making men feel feelings that they shouldn't. Again, it's blaming the women. It's ridiculous.
1980 quote here. Remember, even children and women in their 80s are sometimes attacked. And since sexy attire is a factor in some rapes, it is wise to dress modestly. It's just contradicting itself. It's going, the 80-year-old that got raped wasn't raped for looking sexy, was she? So dress had nothing to do with that. So how does one thing lead on this incredible inability to have a logical flow of thought is just highlighted perfectly in that sentence there. This 2013 art project, What Were You Wearing? These pictures here, you can see that people who victims of rape have been wearing every single sort of clothing, some of it revealing, some of it completely non-revealing.
Yeah, I heard it well said by an advocate for women's safety. She said the reality is a woman should be able to walk down the street completely naked and still not be in fear of being sexually assaulted. She's just trying to explain the reality is it makes no difference what you're wearing. People need to be respected regardless of anything else. And the fact that you've made reference to that other high control or fundamentalist religious groups have the same sort of problems. The Mormons have this history too of things where a total misunderstanding of the culture of safety when it comes to women. It happens in other organizations. Christian-based universities in the States are under a huge amount of scrutiny at the moment for victim blaming. There's lawsuits going on at the moment. All of which happens when an organization takes its guidance from an archaic textbook and tries to somehow formulate that as the basis, rather than just looking at what is right in terms of society. How do we take care of people and how do we give people rights in society?
Yeah, I mean, they talk about the Bible being God's perfect law, so we can't deviate from it, but the Bible deviated from itself. You saw, the New Testament overrode a lot of the Old Testament, so it became more enlightened through a lot of based on Greek philosophy. So it's a different period. We should be able to update it and do what is just naturally what anyone knows can tell if they just listen to their heart and their mind and research is right. All right, so let's conclude. This has been way longer than I thought it would be. But it's a huge article. I just think it's just such an important topic. I don't want to be totally down on the Watchtower because it does talk often about God cares about women are a great army. We love the fact that most of the witnesses in full-time service are women helping do their free service for growing our organization. It's like they do talk about it, but when you weigh that up with the other part, what they say in other journals, in other articles, if you put the two together, any praise about women is just condescension.
Yeah, look, even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Yeah, lovely.
That does not justify the rest of the time. It's terrible behavior.
There's a great paragraph that you put in the article that paying lip service to equality deflects attention from the core teaching that women are to submit themselves to men who are to be viewed as their head. And it's basically this headship arrangement that devalues women and has the tragic consequences that we spoke about in our chat today. That's the consequences of domestic violence, child abuse, and rape. So at its core, it's because women are not considered fundamentally equal.
Complementarianism.
I guess this is why the new ones growing up in the religion are not really taking to it, because you can't grow up and be aware now. Like 100 years ago, when women couldn't even vote, and this like shocking white male-dominated culture, this colonialist culture of the last few hundred years, where white people went and spread Christianity and dominated every other group as being inferior and treated women as inferior. I can understand the women sitting there feeling lucky that they were part of the true religion. But nowadays, when growing up and realizing as a young girl in a congregation that you are, from everything else, that women can vote and they can be successful in managerial positions, and that companies are looking out for women not to be subjected to any misbehavior, to then that they are still told that these like very prehistoric type teachings that women just can't even look at the audience in the eye, because that might indicate that you think you're on the same level as the brothers in that audience. It's just absolutely despicable. They can't help but, even when they're trying to be positive, be negative. Like when they talk about Watchtower 2014, the woman is a gift from God to Adam. She was a perfect helper to him. It's like
they totally miss it. They don't hear it. They don't hear it. They don't hear how wrong that whole concept is. She's not a freaking helper for the man. She's a woman, a human in her own right, with everything that she has to offer. Far out.
Yeah, an equal, not a gift.
No.
The worst is this Golden Age article. Whether the identity of the sexes as such will be preserved, we do not know. There have been some well-authenticated instances in which women have been transformed into men, and it is possible that this transformation may become general, and we shall all be brothers together.
So we come back to homosexuality then?
Once the earth is filled, and because there's no death, you can't have any more children. So women are then of no use, because it basically is saying the only use for women is procreation.
Right. Procreation.
After the world is full in the system, procreation isn't needed. So possibly they'll all just become men. Like it's just.
Illegal.
So I have to. I mean, the witnesses are a little bit more, a little bit more subtle these days, but. Still a long way to go to have any acceptable conversation about how.
And again, they should be at the forefront of these things if they are guided by God's Holy Spirit. They should be at the forefront. They shouldn't just be playing catch up 10, 20, 30 years behind where we're at as the rest of society.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand how witnesses don't get that concept that the 1919, when they got chosen, should be the yardstick that everyone else complies with. There should need to be light getting brighter, like maybe light getting brighter about who's the wild beast or whatever, but about human decency, how to treat each other, that shouldn't be changing. That should have been set in stone. Like human decency, how we view males and females and abuse, and violence, those things, they don't need to get brighter. I mean, God should have set those rules back in Genesis 1 verse 1, not we're still tweaking them in 2020, 2021. I was brought up quite chauvinistically, obviously, because my mother had to support the fact that even though she was emotionally far more out there, a very dogmatic, extroverted person, my father was like very quiet, introverted person. They were both very intelligent, but my mother had to justify that Dad made a good elder and she could never make a good elder because women are emotionally inferior. Women don't have control emotionally, and that is why the Watchtower says that women can't hold positions of leadership. As a witness, did you feel that your value or self-worth was diminished because you were a female? Did that ever sort of cross your mind?
It was something that did cause a little bit of unease and frustration. I have to confess to that. I was held back from some of the things that I wanted to do. For example, I wanted to go to Bethel. I applied for 4 years running, but never I didn't have anything to offer to Bethel because I'd left school at year 10. I had no skills or trades, any talents that they could use. I'd only pioneered from 16. But that frustrated me that only single brothers got the privilege of going to Bethel, and that it just I even had the elders in the congregation speaking to me about it. If they saw these applications coming every year from me, everyone knew I was never going to get in. It wasn't going to happen. And that did frustrate me that the same opportunities were not extended because of my sex.
I could say one thing though, and Paul will probably attest to this. Both of us spent many years in Bethel. You didn't miss out on much.
No, look, hindsight's an amazing thing. And the really bizarre thing in that whole thing is that after 4 years, I pioneered for 10 years, but I applied to Bethel 4 years, and then I just stopped because, okay, one, I kind of knew it was futile and it wasn't going anywhere, but also because I learnt, it sounds so weird to say, but I actually learnt to enjoy my pioneer service. And I actually really enjoyed that. I enjoyed talking to people. I wasn't a very good pioneer because I didn't convert. Maybe I'm one person, but I enjoyed the whole speaking to people and just listening to people. And so
yeah. Did you just marry me so you could get into Bethel?
Well, no, because we didn't even go into Bethel, did we? Because we had the opportunity. We had the opportunity before we were we got married.
You just married me for my position. That's what it was all about.
Yeah.
Being a pioneer is the pinnacle
Yes.
for a female for achievement, which is funny because it's like basically you're becoming a free salesperson for the religion. To get into Bethel as a female, you can only get in if you're not married, on the basis that you're a nurse, because they just couldn't find enough male nurses, or you broke the rules, went to university, and you became a lawyer or
a graphic designer or something. Yeah.
So there's only like a handful of out of like when we were in Bethel, what was there, maybe at one stage 400 or 500 people, and there might have been 5 single women there. So yeah, so you definitely missed out on those opportunities. Which, I mean, the pinnacle, I guess, is to be a cow, second overseas wife.
Well, that's the other thing, Paul, is that as a single woman, all you can aspire to is pioneer service. Anything else is not on the back of your own merit. It's on the back of a man's merit. And you are therefore defined by the men in your life. So you're either an elder's daughter or an elder's wife, but you're never actually able to stand on your own feet. And if you're not married, then you're pitiable because you're a single sister, right? And you're pitiable.
And as with many aspects of society, when a woman has a goal that they want to try and achieve, even in the organization, to be the best possible witness, they're labeled as being ambitious or perhaps being a little bit too proud or haughty and not humble enough under the direction of the men in the congregation.
Yeah, and in normal society, if you are female and you're not married, but there's many successful women that are CEOs of banks in Australia, on the chief justices and that sort of thing, and so you can have an identity despite being not married. Whereas as a witness, if you're not married, you have no spiritual identity, really. There's so many witnesses that they've been brought up as witnesses, and they somehow feel that the way witnesses treat them as females in the organisation has to be justified, and they need to just stand up and go, this is just another proof that this is not Jehovah's organisation. It is a stodgy old white person's organisation. It represents everything. This religion represents everything that's terrible about the world now, with this whole colonialisation and the way that different ethnic groups are treated and different minority groups are treated, and how females are treated and how different sexual orientations are treated. Witnesses still have all that horrific evil history bound up that might have been thought acceptable if you're a white male back in 1879, but now needs to be done away with. So I don't see how any woman can justify I mean, I understand because they were indoctrinated into it, how they can justify staying in that religion and supporting that sort of treatment of themselves, or men who have any decency about them want to be part of that religion and support it as well.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said. And it's like that quote that Sherry said earlier, you know, that you don't participate in your own oppression. You just, a woman needs to stand up and not participate in her own oppression.
Just don't accept it.
Anyway, great to discuss this with you. Nice to, sorry to have to put you through that, relive the old days, Sherry, but it was just to have your perspective on things. And also know that how you, as someone who is, you know, intelligent, who thinks about things, how you can justify that you just, you accepted it. And that's what really offended me about myself, is a lot of the people in my congregation left in their 20s. I left at 35. I'm like, how can I justify that I was that stupid or that weak, or what was it? What was my flaw that I lasted so much longer than many of my other friends?
Yeah.
And it's like, you can't blame yourself. It's, you know, we've been indoctrinated and manipulated, and so many factors of that, how that manipulation is done through, you know, the rest of the website looks at that. That you can't blame yourself. It's just you've got to be, I guess, more respect that you were one of the ones that could stand up and leave, and this dissonance finally was too much for you to accept, and you had to leave.
And I think that's what drives my need to support others, because I'm still trying to make sense of how I believed what I did and supported what I did.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's kind of, it's essential to who I am now, that I have to be involved in trying to help others come out, because it kind of makes sense of the madness of what I came from.
Yeah, the only thing that makes a man more qualified is a certain appendage, right?
Yeah, and I'm not. I think that makes men less qualified to be any good at anything normally, because once they start thinking with the wrong appendage, they start making very bad decisions.
Yes, I would agree with that.